Welcome to the Gloam. Tales of monstrous black beasts roaming the countryside have existed for centuries, primarily in the British Isles. Terrifying and ominous creatures our ancestors have long feared to encounter on quiet, gloomy lanes, pitch-black forests and woodlands, and misty, isolated moors. This creature, or spectre, is an abnormally large black dog, often described as having burning red eyes. Sometimes the dog is malicious and harmful. Sometimes a sighting foreshadows death or tragedy. Occasionally, very occasionally, the black dog may be helpful, shepherding lost travellers or guarding people from harm. The dark beasts are notorious for disappearing into a mist and leaving no trace of their eerie visits. Sometimes the dog merely appears before you ominously. At other times it follows or pads around you, accompanied by the sound of heavy dragging chains. It has been depicted as uncannily silent. At other times, packs of black dogs hurtle over moors or fens, barking and howling in a terrifying, frenzied hunt. The creature has sometimes been associated with electrical storms and is notorious for haunting crossroads, ancient pathways, prisons, and places of execution. The legend has been referenced many times in popular culture. One of the most famous ghostly black dogs in fiction appears in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles, where a large dog-like creature haunts the family estate. Sherlock Holmes is brought in to determine if the dog is in fact real or supernatural. Another famous ghostly black dog may be found in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. The Grim, a giant spectral dog that haunts churchyards, is the worst omen of death, according to Harry Potter's divination teacher, Professor Trelawney. Another reference to the legend can be found in the same book, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Padfoot being the nickname of Sirius Black, and Animagus, who can turn into a large black dog, mistaken as the Grim by Harry. Almost every single county across Britain has its own tales, and indeed names of the dog, such as Black Shuck, the Gert Dog, Padfoot, Barguest, the Harry Hound, the Yeth Hound, and the Grim. But as diverse as their regional nicknames and epithets may be, all accounts of these huge creatures over the ages share the ability to send a chill down your spine. The following story takes place in the county of Dorset, in the southwest of England, in the latter stages of World War II. Two enlisted men were driving an army vehicle over Bulborough Hill, on their way to deliver some important documents from Blandford Army Camp to the nearby village of Belcherwell. The witness, who has sadly passed since recounting the story, recalled that it was early evening in summertime, well before the light had started to fade. There wasn't much of a view to speak of on their journey, as there were thick hedgerows either side of the road, so the men stared ahead as they made their way to the destination. Partway down the hillside, suddenly, and without warning, an enormous black dog jumped over the hedge on the right, startling both men. The driver slammed on the brakes. The dog landed on the bonnet of the vehicle, slowly turned its head, and snarled at the two men.
It just kind of floated over the hedge in slow motion. It was a huge black dog.
The witness recalled that it was completely silent, but they'd felt the suspension compress and the front of the car go down, as if reacting to a heavy weight. The dog then turned its head, leapt off the bonnet, and floated over the hedge on the left side of the road and down the hill. The front of the vehicle jolted back up, and the two men sat silently until the driver regained his senses and began to drive off. albeit a fair amount faster than their previous sedate pace. The two men sat in silence for a good while before they both said, "Did you see that?" They both agreed that the best course of action was to continue onwards to Belchewell to carry out their orders before checking the vehicle for paw prints or any sign of where the creature had landed. That might sound odd, but remember, this was during World War II and they were carrying important military documents. So, both men very shaken, they continued onwards silently to their destination. Once there and the documents safely delivered, they checked the bonnet of the vehicle. Not a single mark. Yet the vehicle had rocked when the large black dog landed on the bonnet. Both men wrote down their own descriptions of what they had seen, then swapped the notes to see if their experiences matched. They did. Both had witnessed a huge black dog float over the high hedge on the right, with a heavy chain around its neck, land on their bonnet, then staring at them. It then jumped off the bonnet and floated away over the hedge on the other side. Not once did it touch the road. All of this had seemingly happened with complete silence. The only difference between the accounts was that one man thought the dog was snarling at them. The other described it as grinning. From that day forward, both men were frightened of travelling along the dark lanes around Bilberry Hill. Apparitions of black dogs are usually associated with death or bad omens. And although the elderly witness couldn't recall any deaths at the time, it was wartime, so who could say for certain? The next story is an account of events that occurred much more recently on a winter's day in 1999. Elizabeth lived in a small market town in Dorset. It was like many small towns. Quaint, picturesque narrow roads with pretty Georgian houses and surrounded by woodland. The town was divided in half by the River Stour, a wide and fast-flowing river with a dangerous undercurrent. Elizabeth lived in the east of the small town, in a beautiful old house that dated back to the early 18th century. It had once been one large house that had later been divided into three. Elizabeth's husband was away in the army. This was normal. She was used to it. And besides, for company she had a large yellow Labrador dog. Great soppy old thing called Lulu. On a very cold, frosty but bright November morning, Elizabeth took Lulu for the usual early walk. They went up the narrow lane, over the old bridge, and passed through some great old stone gateposts and into the woods. The gates had belonged to an old manor house, long since burnt down, and the gateposts are topped with sculptures of large dogs, holding a shield engraved with the family coat of arms. According to local legend, these great stone hounds come to life and stalk the woods during the full moon. Once past the gate, there were two choices. The path on the right ran along the side of the river, winding through the trees until it met the old church and the remains of an old watermill. That particular morning, it was muddy and slippery with leaves and ice. The other way was a wider, tarmacked, but seldom used road. Elizabeth chose the road. Lulu was allowed off the lead to walk on ahead, and after walking for about 15 minutes, they came to a bend in the road. Lulu stopped dead in her tracks, head up, staring forward. She then took a few steps back, whimpered, and ran back to Elizabeth. This behaviour was most odd. Elizabeth looked ahead, and coming towards them around the bend, she could see a very large animal of some sort. Lulu had pressed herself tightly into her legs and was crying. Elizabeth looked up again at the black shape coming towards them, and saw that it was a very large black dog. She put the lead back onto Lulu and decided to wait until the other dog's owner came into view. But nobody appeared. The large black dog seemed to approach them very quickly, faster than its legs were moving, which made no sense. When it drew level, Elizabeth was able to take in every detail. She described it as like an oversized, long-haired German shepherd, but its fur was standing out in spikes as if it was frozen that way. It was the blackest black, like a solid, flat, pitch black, darker than any normal black animal. It carried its head down low, and as it passed, it looked directly at Elizabeth, and she said it grinned. She remembered a mouthful of very large, very sharp white teeth that looked too big for its mouth. It moved past them, almost gliding, and continued its way around the bend in the road. It was only then that she realised that it had made no sound. No clicking of claws along the tarmac. It appeared to be floating above the surface of the road. And its breath couldn't be seen, as if it hadn't condensed in the cold air, like that of her own or Lulu's. Elizabeth recalled that she felt no fear, just curiosity, though Lulu was clearly quite upset. And she turned to watch the animal as it continued along the road before just melting into the cold frosty air. She couldn't believe what she'd just seen, so began to walk back along the road to see where the huge black dog had disappeared to. But Lulu, who was still on the lead, pulled and refused to move from the spot. After much cajoling and reassuring, Elizabeth was able to coax Lulu back down the road to where the black dog had vanished. She peered into the trees, could see no sign of it, nor were there any paw prints in the mud. Once back home, Elizabeth felt so intrigued by the whole encounter that she wrote it down in order to tell her husband and daughters. She never saw the huge black dog again, and Lulu showed no further fear or distress along that strange, narrow road in the woods.